This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 87. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 87 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, we are going to be continuing our discussion on building automation system design. And I realized after the fact when I recorded last week's episode that I had went and started talking about BAS design inputs, but I never went and talked about what a BAS design actually is. And then I also kind of left out why this matters, okay? So let me tell you a story here. So when I took over operations of this field team, essentially, it was a $60 million operations team, basically 22 technicians, program managers, or project managers, designers, things like that. I might misspeak today because I've been up since 3 a.m. for some reason. I just haven't been able to sleep. I've got so many ideas on my mind, and it's just keeping me up lately. I'm trying to get them out of my head. But anyways, I digress. So as I was saying, so I'm managing this team and I come in and, I've always been someone who just steps into roles and I'm like, you know what? I don't care if I don't know anything about that. I'm just going to step into it. I'm going to figure it out. And for the most part, that served me well throughout my career. But so there I am, and I step in there, and we're sitting down looking at the financials, and they're like, we have AR greater than 720 for $2 million. And for those of you who know financials, you're like hearing that, and you're like, oh, that really sucks. But what that basically means is you have, and this is not an accounting course, but you have account receivables and account payables, right? So account payables are things you need to pay to people, and account receivables are money you need to receive from people. Well, basically what this meant is there were $2 million that hadn't been paid in like 2 years that were sitting out there because of a couple projects. And as I started to dig into these projects and figure out why we weren't getting paid, I started to realize that the projects were pretty jacked up. They were really messed up. I mean, it was like, oh my goodness, messed up. I mean, stupid things like the CO2 sensor for return air was on the outdoor air shaft. It's like, really? I mean, what is this, outdoor air CO2 control? So, you guys, it was just bad. It was all kinds of bad. And as I started to trace this backwards and do some kind of root cause analysis and figure out why did this all happen, because there were some smart people working on my team, but I realized there was like 4 different designers on this one project because they were using the designers as programmers and as project managers because there was just no organization. There was no structure. And it was just all kinds of craziness. So we got all that worked out. We really segmented the roles. We went and got design kind of set as its own process with dedicated designers. But the thing is that, the problem why this happened is that there was no real understanding of what the design was, how important it was to project success, and then what the design life cycle is. So we're going to cover all of that in this lesson. So the first thing is, what is a BAS design? So, I mean, what is it? Really, what is it? Yeah, it's drawings. Yeah, it's electrical details for your installers. Yeah, it's points list and checkout documents. But what is it? What it really is to me is a design is looking at the intent. Like, if you got a hospital, the intent is to keep the space in conditions that will help the patient heal, or to keep the OR in conditions so that the doctor can do surgery. So when you think about that intent, when you go into your design, you're going to be thinking like, okay, I get that maybe they specified this one nickel sensor, but maybe I should look at a platinum sensor for greater accuracy. Or I realize that they want to use velocity pressure for flow, but maybe I should get a flow sensor for better accuracy, because it becomes more important for an OR. It becomes more important for, a infectious control quarantine room for, a hospital. That becomes much more important. The accuracy, the tuning of the loops. I know we like to say that everything's equally important, that we should do just as good of a job on every project. And I agree, you should do a great job. You should give a quality product. But your loops don't have to be as perfect for a warehouse as they have to be for a hospital. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand, like, why you would need to go and really just, like, understand the intent? And I think that gets missed. I think the intent behind what this building is going to be used for is lost. And I think that's really the first step around a design. And then, the design itself, I mean, it's pretty simple. You take a scope, and then you take that scope and you're basically turning it into instructions for your installation and programming and execution team. And you're adding any details where necessary. Basically, the scope is going to come from the salesperson or from the inside salesperson, whomever, the person who basically sold the job. They're going to look at the drawings. They're going to look at the specification. They're going to look at all the inputs we covered in the previous podcast episode. And they're going to take those inputs, and then they're going to create a scope. So basically, that scope is going to be what you're doing for this project. But then you, as a designer, you need to look at that scope, and you need to look at the documents they gave you, and you need to interpret that and create instructions. I want you to think about your drawings as instructions. I don't want you to think of them as, and I think if we're all honest to ourselves, we start to do so many designs, we get into that flow where they all just kind of become the same thing, and we start to use existing designs. We start to go and say, oh, it's a mixed path air handler, so we're gonna go, or a dual duct air handler, or a fan coil, so we're gonna go and we're just gonna copy what we've taken from a previous job, and we're just gonna plop it in there and make some changes. And that's good. You got to do that. You got to maximize efficiencies. But at the same time, you've got to go and, to what I said earlier, take that intent, that idea behind the design, and pull that in to your design. All right? And so then that becomes instructions that you really want that intent to come across. And then next we add our details, right? So you do our details, and the details are they're going to be what makes your design great or not great. Because at the end of the day, you don't judge a designer based on the deliverables. And I know when I'm selling my design course, I message around a reduction in submittal rejections, because that's what people care about. And I get that. I totally get that. Having run an operations team, I realize that if you have to completely redo submittals, you're adding like another 40 hours of labor that you didn't have to do. And so that is a very, really real benefit that resonates with a lot of folks when I'm going and communicating the value of my course. However, you got to judge it by financials, your design and your execution, because at the end of the day, if you can't keep your doors open, you can't stay in business. But how you should really judge your designs is the execution. Because if you're executing poorly, it means one of two things, right? Either the design was terrible, or your installation team and programmers are incompetent. I mean, it's one of the two. And I know people don't like to hear that, because everyone's like, oh, I could never mess up. I've made so many mistakes in my career. I think you need to own your mistakes. I think you should embrace your mistakes, but you've got to learn from your mistakes. I mean, you can't be stupid and just like keep connecting 120 volts to controllers and frying them and being like, oh, I wonder why that happened. I'm just going to get a new controller. I mean, you know, but at the same time, you've got to go and, you've got to embrace those mistakes. But where I was going with this is that the execution should be how you judge the designs. Because sometimes, let's be real, sometimes you're going to get a engineer that doesn't know what they're doing. Sometimes you're going to get a construction team that just rejects stuff just to reject stuff. I mean, I've seen all sorts of reasons for stuff to get rejected. So while in most cases the rejected submittal is because you messed something up, there are times when it's not because you messed something up. But you can look at execution, and most times, if things aren't executed well, it's because of an unclear design. So speaking of design, let's look real quick. Look, I'm talking into a podcast. I'm saying let's look at something. I don't know. That just made me chuckle. Maybe it's because I'm slightly sleep deprived, but who knows? Anyways, let's talk about the design life cycle. So as I see it, the design life cycle breaks out into 4 distinct phases, and those are initiating, creating, modifying, and closing. All right. So as you move through a life cycle of a design, you're going to be in one of those stages. And sometimes you come into a project, maybe you come into the project late, maybe the salesperson was out golfing and didn't turn over the documents to you. Not that salespeople, I love you. I've been in sales, so I'm just ribbing on you a little bit. But hey, without sales, nothing comes in the door, right? So in all seriousness, sometimes you end up a little late on the job and the project team's expecting you to be in the creating phase and you're still in the initiating phase. And sometimes the reality is you're brought in as an assistant designer and you need to know where the other designer is at in the process. That way you can take over, because a lot of waste I've seen is where designers do real poor handoffs. They don't hand off RFI logs. They don't hand off notation logs from the spec or from the MEP drawings, and they don't hand that off. And because they don't hand that off, then you have the new designer who's maybe taking over. That designer's starting from scratch, and you're looking at another 40 to 80 hours just to get up to speed. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. So as far as the initiating phase, essentially what it is you get triggered by some sort of event, either a new construction project, a retrofit project, or retro commissioning / design validation. Those are the 3 kind of events that I see that tend to go and trigger the design process. Now, depending on what event type you're in, will depend on whether or not you're going and actually using all the documents we covered in the input podcast last week, or whether you're using just some of them. So like I said, they got new construction, you're building something, there's no kind of existing thing that you're building on. Then you've got retrofit, and I mean, this is all pretty self-explanatory, right? Retrofit is you're changing an existing thing. And then retro commissioning, design validation, this is kind of a big trend I'm starting to see pick up. It kind of died down a little, and now it's picking back up again. I've talked to a lot of customers who are they're looking at getting really serious about retro commissioning and design validation, because they've been squeezing for so long. Because you got to understand how a lot of operations teams operate. What happens is they're given a operational threshold, and their goal is actually to reduce the cost of that operational threshold each year. That's just the reality. Well, you can only reduce cost so much by, reducing people, reducing tasks, before you significantly degrade the performance of the building. So a lot of people are wisening up and they're seeing that, hey, I can do retro commissioning, I can do design validation. And while there is definitely an upfront cost, the tools exist now that make it, between analytics tools and data analysis tools and stuff like that, the tools exist now that make it palatable. They make it efficient enough. They give a good enough return on investment for folks to actually be interested in this. Because in the past, the act of going and normalizing all the data and consuming all the data and then having someone who would analyze it and writing the algorithms and all that jazz, it was just a cost no one wanted to bear. But a lot of that is automated in tools nowadays. And so you're seeing that kind of resurgence. At least I'm seeing that resurgence. Maybe I just am seeing it because those are the customers I'm seeing. But it seems pretty stretched. When I say stretched, it seems to be a common theme that I'm seeing. Enough so that I think there is actually a shift going on. Now, as I mentioned, you go into this initiating phase. And during this phase, you're going to do scope reviews and you're going to do sales to operations handoffs. And essentially, the scope review is where you're going to review the scope, make sure you got all this stuff. And then this usually is taking place as part of the sales to operations handoff. This is where they're going through, they're handing you the latest documents, giving you the contacts, making sure you know everything you're supposed to know about the project. That way you can properly execute the design. They're also giving you any design constraints as well as any time limitations around the design. From there, you're going to move into the creating phase, which some of the creating phase is going to look similar to the initiating phase. And you're going to be like, that's kind of interesting. But really, your two focus areas are going to be input review and then the initial creation of your design documents. Now, you're like, input review? What do you mean? Because I just said on the sales to operations handoff, we're going to be doing input review, right? Well, here, what you're doing is you're doing a much deeper dive, because let's be real. In the sales to operations handoff, as much as I'd love to say that everyone goes and they read completely through the spec and they look at every drawing, it just doesn't happen. And maybe there's some of you out there who do that perfectly, but I'm just being real. When it's summertime and all the K through 12 projects are hitting and your team is like at 4 different elementary schools at the same time trying to execute projects, and you're just literally trying to make sure that the documents get from the sales guy to the ops guy. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. So now that that's happened, it's time to really take a deep dive into those documents. You've got to start going and reading through the specification and really documenting. Because the reality is, even if you found something during the sales to operations handoff, that contract's been signed, it's been handed to the contracting team or to the owner, and you're not going to go back and do major revisions and be like, oops, I missed this because I didn't know how to scope a job. I mean, seriously, that you're not going to do that. What you're most likely going to do is do some sort of RFI, which is a request for information, or just using those mechanisms. So you're going to be reading through the specs, taking notes, going through the drawings, taking notes, validating that against the scope of work, just kind of building your RFI log, all those things. But you're also going to be creating your initial design documents. You're going to be going through and creating your design documents during this phase. Which then brings us to the modifying phase. And this is kind of a combination of both the submittal kind of process as well as the submittal rejection or clarification handling process and final submittal documents. So typically what will happen here is you'll do an initial submittal, and it's not uncommon for the first submittal to get rejected. That doesn't mean you're a bad designer. It just means that in most cases you're making assumptions. Maybe you haven't got the RFIs back that you need yet, but you're under a timeline threshold to get your initial design submitted. And you'll get rejections, not necessarily because you totally hose something up, but more so because you're sitting there and you're working with something that, how do I say this? You're working with something that probably wasn't fully defined when it was engineered, and now it's getting figured out on the construction project. Because you see how construction drawings go. You've got schematics, you've got your design, you've got your construction documents, all these different phases. And as you move closer and closer to 100% construction drawings, or CDs as they like to call them, then you get more and more accurate on what's actually being installed and how it's being installed. And then you can accurately submit. However, most times you're submitting, you're not at 100% CDs, so there's going to be a little bit of gap. So you go through that with RFIs, you go through that with your initial resubmit and your clarifications, and that pretty much takes you through where you need to be, and then you package all that up. Now, you shouldn't be having like 6 or 7 resubmits. That means you're messing something up. But 1, maybe 2, that would be normal. But the reality is, if you follow these processes, you most of the time will only have about 1 resubmit, and that'll just be for clarifications. Moving right along, then we come to the closeout process, right? And this is an interesting one because I've seen a big shift as of lately in the closeout process. In the past, we used to do point-to-point checkout documents and we create them, but we just do it kind of as a CYA. We'd go and we'd do a sampling of the devices, check them out, make sure most of them are functioning properly, and then we'd go and we'd log that. But nowadays, you're starting to see a lot of specifications that are asking for full point-to-point checklists on all systems, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I do think it's a bad thing when they expect the same price, but they expect you to do, anywhere from 40 to 400 more hours of work, and they expect the same price. And then they slap on functional testing onto there too, because everyone is all about lead and those kind of things these days, so they want to get those enhanced commissioning credits and things like that. So now you've got this lead consultant who may or may not understand BAS going and evaluating your functional tests, and I'm smiling here. I'm like, how do I say this? They're evaluating your functional tests, and they may not understand how it's supposed to function. So that goes and creates a really interesting situation right there. So then, you've got to produce those point-to-point checklists. You got to potentially produce functional tests, sheets, and you've got to get those approved, and then you've got to process them. And then you get into the whole red lines as built scenario, right? Where hopefully you had some sort of strategy to handle red line consolidation. And hopefully you're going and implementing that strategy in a way that is effective so that you aren't dealing with 40 different sets of red lines from a bunch of different people, and you're trying to make sense because the red lines conflict with one another, and then there you are spending several days. You can start to see how if you have a process around design, there's so many areas for efficiency improvement. There's so many areas where you can really decrease the amount of labor and the amount of cost that you're going and having in your design and installation process just by having a process. So with that, then you come out of this with your as-builts or your closeout documents, which now you package up according to the specification. And then that is going to go and take you through how you're supposed to close out the project. So that's the design life cycle. And it's really important for you to grasp those different phases, because at each one of those phases, there's different deliverables. And while you may do, let's for example, and this is one I see quite a bit, the creating phase, right? You may actually do a couple iterations of the creating and the actual modifying phase as you're creating your documents. And here's what I mean by that. So let's say you get a specification, and your specification says, within 12 to 16 weeks, you need to have the full design submitted for approval. No work can start before that. But you're like, okay, I got 16, 20 weeks. You're like all excited. But then as you actually dig deeper into the spec, this is why you should always read the full thing and not just like lock onto one statement and be like, oh, I got 16, 20 weeks. I'm done. Good. No, because then, you go to the next page and it says, product cut sheets and bill of materials are due within 2 weeks. That then becomes almost a mini creating and modifying right there, because what you're going to do, you're going to grab the product cut sheets, you're going to grab the bill of materials, which that's always been interesting to me, how folks are asking for a bill of materials before the design is done, because it's like, this bill of materials, it's not going to be accurate. I mean, sure, I'll give you one. It's not going to be accurate, though. But nonetheless, they want it. It makes them feel happy about themselves or something, feel like they're accomplishing. I don't know why, but the reality is it's pretty useless. But it's contractually obligated, and so there you are. You kind of got to do it. But you're going to actually end up going and submitting that, and most likely having to go through RFIs and resubmit during that process, because you're submitting a bill of materials, and it's never going to fail that you're submitting a bill of materials on a design that isn't done yet, and people are going to argue with you that the bill of materials is wrong. They're going to be like, well, you've got the wrong sensors for this air handler. And you're like, the air handler design isn't done yet. And they're like, well, yeah, but it's the wrong sensors. And you're like, yeah, but it's not done. You don't even have completed mechanical drawings for the air handler yet. How can we even agree where a sensor is going to go or what type of sensor it's going to be? You haven't determined your ductwork sizes yet. So how am I going to determine the size of my duct probe? Well, you should know that. You're the BAS guy. That's what they always say. Oh, it frustrates the heck out of me. I mean, I hate that answer. And I know I'm totally going on a tangent here, but I hate when you say something and you're trying to help the team, and the answer is, well, you're the BAS guy. You should figure that out. And it's like, okay. All right, dude. No reason to be... I want to say something, but I'm not going to say it. I promised I would quit swearing in this podcast, so I'm not going to go there. Anyways, the reality is that you can have multiple mini phases within a phase, and you got to be aware of that, because if you don't catch those little nuances, they'll really come back to bite you. And so that's kind of how you got to look at the life cycle. That's how you've got to go and approach this whole thing. So what did we cover, right? So we went through what a design is. We kind of talked through the philosophy about design and how you really want to understand the design intent when you go and you approach your design. We also talked through the design life cycle. We talked through the initiating, creating, modifying, and closing phases of the design, and how when you really understand those, you're really going to start to see your designs improve. So next week, we're going to close out this design series. I might do one more episode. I'm not sure. But for sure, I'm doing next week. And that's going to be where we're going to talk about the design deliverables. We're going to talk about the outputs of a design. And we'll go through those and what those are and kind of what you can expect. And maybe some tips and tricks I've gained along the way. But we may do one more podcast episode. So with that being said, that's it. I really encourage you all to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/87. Once again, that's buildingautomationmonthly.com/87. Sign up for the waitlist for my design course, which will be opening in October. You're going to get, if you sign up on that waitlist, you're going to get some quality training that I'm going to send out, regardless of whether you end up purchasing the course or not. I'm going to go and be given several different video trainings on design that I think you're going to find immensely valuable. So I really encourage you to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/87 and scroll down to where it says Design for BAS waitlist. Click that kind of icon image and sign up. So it's Sunday night, and I'm sitting here I had originally ended this episode right here, but I had something crazy happen over the weekend. I was listening to a podcast episode on internet business mastery, and they were talking about how they really wanted to help folks learn internet business, and that it just seems so hard to find quality training because a lot of the courses out there, they're $3,000, $4,000, and that's just not affordable to the average person. And I started thinking to myself, I was like, you know what? I mean, I charge $1,000, and all the feedback I've gotten is, yeah, this is totally worth it. The value you pack into your courses is amazing. But then I started thinking to myself, I was like, yeah, but can the average person afford $1,000? And yeah, they can if they get past the mental block that they can't afford it. If they can see the short term investment in their career and see that there's an ROI on that that way exceeds what they're going to pay. Because, for example, I spent like $5,000 on courses this year just to teach myself out of my own pocket. And I see a huge ROI on those. But like I was saying, I started thinking about it and I was like, what if I could go and find a way to make it to where my training would be affordable to almost anyone? Something that would be like the price of a cup of coffee each day. Something pretty affordable. And so what I came out with is Building Automation Monthly Premium. And basically what it is as long as you're a member, and there's a 12-month commitment to the membership site, because otherwise folks would become members, download everything, and leave. I mean, I've been doing this thing long enough to know that that happens sometimes. But basically what it is you get access to all my current courses and my future courses as long as you're a member, access to 2 group mentoring calls a month, access to a video subject matter expert interview where I interview like a commissioning agent or cybersecurity professional or network professional and ask them a ton of questions, do a really detailed video interview, and then I record that and share it with you all. A video teaching, and then also a dedicated group forum so that you're able to go and chat with other folks and access all the archives of all these coaching calls and all the recordings. So, I mean, I've thought long and hard, and that's a ton of value. It's about $6,000 a month worth of value that I've packed in there. And then I decided, all right, I'm going to price that $99 a month, which that's $3 a day. I mean, it's dirt cheap when you consider everything you got. So I have launched that to the email list, and I consider you guys and gals. I know some women listen to this, so you guys and gals, I consider you my family, my BAM Nation as well. And so I wanted to make you aware of that. So when you go down to the podcast page, you'll see that you can go and sign up for that program, because I'm shutting that down on October 1st. I'm not going to have it open for sale anymore, and then I'll probably open it every 3 months, I'm thinking. But yeah, you really should take advantage of that. I mean, it's everything I wish I had when I was starting off in building automation. And I really think this is going to go a long way towards helping folks. I see too many of these vendor courses that are $1,500, $2,500, and they teach you for 5 days, and you may or may not remember something, and all you get is a certification for a product, but it really doesn't give you skills outside of that, and you got to travel and take time off work and take time away from the family. Whereas this, it's all online, it's all community based, and it's going to be freaking awesome. So definitely, like I said earlier, go check out buildingautomationmonthly.com/87. Check that out. I don't think you're going to regret it. It's pretty awesome. As a matter of fact, I know you're not going to regret it. I should go and really clear that statement up. I know for a fact you're not going to regret it, because this is so much value packed in here. I've had some people emailing me going, Phil, you're crazy to do this, but my goal is to help the community. My goal is to get 20,000 people in the building automation field by 2020, making a solid 6-figure career, and this is how I believe I can help folks get there. So, all right, folks, that's it. I will talk to you again next week. Take care.